And most people think the man of lawlessness, 2 Thessalonians 2, is the same as the beast of Revelation in chapter 13 of Revelation. And basically, I was kind of persuaded. This is talking about Nero.
Well, let me first be tactful here and tell you that outrageous claims, and this is an outrageous claim, require outrageous evidence.
Again, this is from Charles, his translation and notes of the Ascension of Isaiah. And this is in the introduction, page 52, 53. This talks about the development of this Antichrist concept, okay? And included in this is a Neronic myth. It's important to know a thing or two about this if you're researching preterism, because they misuse this to trick people. So I'm going to tell you what really is going on here. Now, this is the same book I was quoting earlier. You might recognize I was reading some of this material here. This is talking about the Antichrist theme, okay? And Charles goes on to talk about other developments. The Beliar myth, and eventually here you get to the Neronic myth, okay? Let me just read something to you here. The Neronic myth. Since we have here to deal only with the early and independent development of the Neronic myth, our present task is simply to show that soon after the death of Nero, the myth became current that A, Nero had not really died, but was still living, and B, that he would soon return from the Far East to take vengeance on Rome. A, when Nero, with the help of a freedman, committed suicide and was cremated, so great was the public joy that the people thronged the streets in holiday attire. All, however, did not share in the general rejoicing, nor yet in the belief of Nero's death. Thus Tacitus writes that there were many who pretended and believed that he was still alive. And Suetonius declares that edicts were issued in his name, as though he were still alive and would return speedily to destroy his enemies. That this belief gained a wide currency very soon after Nero's decease is shown by the fact that within a year after it, 69 AD, an impostor had already appeared under his name. The pretender in this movement was put to death in Cythnus by Calpurnius Asprinus. That Nero had taken refuge in the Far East probably formed a constituent of the myth from the outset, for we are told that prophecies made during his lifetime had pointed to the East as the scene of his future greatness. Some of these declared that he would make Jerusalem the seat of his empire, and others that he would finally recover the sovereignty of the world. It was probably such vaticinations as these, combined with the fact that Nero had already established friendly relations with the Parthian king, Vologesus I, that led Nero, as the end drew nigh, to think of fleeing to the Parthians. In conformity with this expectation, we find that the second pseudo-Nero appeared under Titus on the Euphrates about 80 AD, and was recognized by the Parthian king Artabanus. Finally, in the reign of Domitian, about 88 AD, a third pretender came forward among the Parthians, and all but succeeded in hurling Parthia against Rome. Even as late as 100 AD, the belief was current that Nero was still alive. The Nero myth was thus firmly rooted among the common folk of the Gentile world within the first decade after his death. Within the same decade, it had established itself in the eschatology of Hellenistic Judaism. This statement can be proved from the following passages in the Syllabine oracles. Thus, in 143 to 147, which belongs to the oldest sections of the book and was written 71 to 74 AD, as Zahn and Bosset rightly assert, the flight of Nero from Babylon equals Rome to the Parthians is mentioned. Nero's return is foretold. Early in the next decade, we find other testimonies to the prevalence of this myth. Thus, in 119 to 122, 80 AD, Nero is described as a fugitive to Parthia, and in 137 to 139 as returning to assail the west at the head of a vast host. In the New Testament, this widespread expectation has left its memorial also in the New Testament. Now, you don't have to necessarily agree with Charles here, but listen to what he says. The first passage referring to the embattled might of the kings of the east marching against Rome is Revelation 16:12. And the sixth poured out his bowl upon the great river, the Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way might be made ready for the kings that come from the sunrising. But in 17, the traces of this myth are far more abundant and unmistakable. Indeed, as very many scholars have already observed, this chapter in original form was a symbolic description by a Jewish writer of Nero's returning at the head of the Parthian kings. Nero is the 8th king mentioned in 1711, yet he is one of the 7 spoken of in the same verse, the last of whom was Vespasian. The chapter, however, was subsequently worked over and adapted to the form of the latter Neronic myth. Thus verses 8, 11a, 14, 15 tell of Nero Redivivus. He is the beast that was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss. Verse 8. And again, in the same verse, the beast which was and is not and shall have his parousia. Similarly, in verse 11a, by excising with Bosset 6b, 8, 11a, 14, 15, we can in large measure recover the original form of the Jewish document which prophesied the destruction of Rome by Nero and the Parthian kings. These kings are symbolically described in verses 12, 13, and the 10 horns that thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one mind, and they give their power and authority unto the beast. He goes on to describe, Charles does, the fusion of the Antichrist myth with that of Beliar, independently with that of Nero Redivivus. As a result of this fusion, the Antichrist is regarded as a God-opposing man armed with miraculous powers. This appears to have been effected on Christian soil before 50 AD. B, a purely satanic power before 70 AD. A, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-12. According to the usual interpretation, presents an indubitable instance of this fusion. Thus, on the one hand, we have Beliar, the man of lawlessness, is all but certainly a translation of Beliar. And he refers to the Septuagint here. Deuteronomy 15:9, 2 Kings 22:5, and it's used as an epithet. In the next place, it is Beliar appearing as the Antichrist. For the words, he that opposeth himself against all that is called God, form an excellent definition of the Antichrist. If 2 Thessalonians is an authentic writing of St. Paul, and the evidence appears to me to point decidedly in this direction, we have here the earliest evidence for the fusion of these myths, 50 A.D., and also for the humanization of the Beliar myth through its fusion with that of Antichrist, for hitherto Beliar had been conceived as a satanic or superhuman being. The Antichrist thus comes to be conceived as a God-opposing man armed with miraculous or satanic powers. He goes on to describe some more things there. All of these details are really important. He talks about the abomination of desolation a bit here. And on page 65 then, he talks about the fusion of the Antichrist myth with that of the Nero Redivivus. This fusion could hardly have taken place before the first half of Domitian's reign, when the last Neronic pretender appeared. As soon, however, as the hope of the return of the living Nero could no longer be entertained, the way was prepared for this transformation of the myth. The living Nero indeed was no longer expected to return from the east, but Nero was to be restored to life from the abyss by the dragon, that is, Satan. This expectation is recounted in Revelation 13. First, the beast that comes up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads is clearly to be identified with the Roman Empire. 13:1. To this beast the dragon gives his power and his throne. 13:2. But one of his heads, Nero, had been as it were smitten unto death, but the death stroke was healed, that is, Nero was restored to life. 13:3-14. Nero, so restored, spoke great things and blasphemies, and authority was given to him to reign for 42 months. That is the 3.5 years for which, according to universal tradition, the Antichrist was to rule. Further references to Nero Redivivus as the Antichrist will be found in 17:8. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss, and to go into perdition. And again, when they beheld the beast, how that he was and is not and shall come. Finally, in verse 11 of the same chapter, the identification of Nero Redivivus with the Antichrist is inevitable. And the beast that was and is not is himself also an 8th, and is of the 7, and he goeth to perdition. In the above passages, Nero Redivivus and the Roman Empire are identified. The former is regarded as an incarnation of all the might and horror of the latter. Three, fusion of the Antichrist, Beliar, and Neronic myths in various degrees and forms. From this fusion, the myth emerges in 3 forms, which owe their diversity in the main to the 3 variations of the Neronic myth which enter into the combination. These forms are 1. Incarnation of Beliar as the Antichrist in Nero still conceived as alive. The Antichrist has here a political significance and is human. 2. Incarnation of the Beliar as the Antichrist in the form of the dead Nero. The Antichrist has here no political significance and is a satanic being. 3. Incarnation of Beliar as the Antichrist in Nero Redivivus. Let's skip ahead to that one. Incarnation of Beliar as the Antichrist in Nero Redivivus. It is quite possible that the phase of the Antichrist myth which I have given under heading 2 should appear here. In that case, this development would belong to the reign of Domitian. In the Syllabine Oracles 5:28-34, written in the reign of Hadrian, the enigmatical account of Nero appears to involve all the above elements. Thus it is Nero Redivivus that is described, for the author of the lines is writing 2 generations after Nero's death. In the next place he is called in semi-mythological language the serpent. Herein we have the Beliar element. And finally, he makes himself equal to God. The lines bearing on our subject in this book are 28, 29, 33, 34. Book 5, 214 to 227 belongs more clearly to the above classification. According to this passage, Nero is to return aloft through the air, upborne by the fates. His achievements are portrayed in 219 to 225. In Book 8, of which lines 4 to 429 belong to the close of the 2nd century, the various myths have so thoroughly coalesced that Nero is no longer regarded as a man but as a satanic monster. He has himself become the dragon, 888, and assumed the monster's form, 8:157. It is needless here to pursue the ramifications of this myth further, than to state that so thoroughly did the Neronic element in the composite Antichrist saga gain the upper hand in the East, that in Armenian the word Nero became the equivalent for Antichrist. So when early church fathers refer to Nero in connection with Antichrist, they see him really as a type. And they really did not give much merit to this idea that Nero would be revived to be the final end times tyrant. Although they have heard of that, some of them did lean toward that idea. But always, even with an identification of Nero with this Antichrist type, always did they keep in mind that a future Antichrist tyrant was yet to emerge. They always knew that. And I challenge Ortland to show me any church fathers who say Nero exhausted the Antichrist prophecies. Because that's really what Gavin Ortland's insinuating to his audience, that Nero exhausted the Antichrist prophecies. None of the early church thought that.